On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all of us at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to the second session on JLF's Brave New World Season 3. Our magazine partner for this series is The Week, Journalism with a Human Touch. In case any of you missed our earlier session today, Into the Wild with Matthias Klum in conversation with Janvi Prasad, you can catch it on our YouTube and Facebook platforms. Our second session for the day is Singing in the Dark, K. Satchidanandan and Nishi Chawla in conversation with Mohini Gupta. Singing in the Dark brings together the finest of poetic responses to the coronavirus pandemic. Edited by K. Satchidanandan and Nishi Chawla, it has more than 100 of the world's most esteemed poets reflect upon a crisis that has dramatically altered our lives and laid bare our vulnerabilities. K. Satchidanandan is a poet, playwright, fiction writer, travel writer, editor, and social and literary critic in Malayalam, English, with well over 70 original works and 30 books of translations of poetry from across the world. He has 32 collections of poems in 18 languages, including Arabic, German, French, Italian, Chinese, and Japanese, besides all major Indian languages. Nishi Chawla is an academician and a writer. She has 6 collections of poetry, 9 plays, 2 screenplays, and 2 novels to her credit. She is now on the faculty of Thomas Edison State University, New Jersey. Nishi Chawla's plays get staged both in the US and in India. Mohini Gupta is currently a research scholar in language politics at the University of Oxford. She recently founded the multilingual digital collective Mother Tongue Twisters to promote Indian languages poetry for young readers and curate conversations on literary translation. Please comment by typing it in the comment section. Ladies and gentlemen, we now present Singing in the Dark, K. Satchidanandan and Nishi Chawla in conversation with Mohini Gupta. Over to you, Mohini.
Thank you so much, Kritika, for the introductions, and thank you, JLF Brave New World, for inviting us to do this session on poetry and the pandemic. This series has really kept us going through the lockdown, so this seems very, very apt. I'm going to begin this session with Bertolt Brecht's famous lines. In the dark times, will there also be singing? Yes, there will also be singing about the dark times. I really think that it's the essence of this quote that is brought out by the recently published anthology Singing in the Dark, a global anthology of poetry under lockdown, edited by K. Satchidanandan and Nishi Chawla. It's such a privilege to witness the responses to the global pandemic by some of the greatest poets around the country and the world. While we've all been grappling with the crises around us and struggling to process this new normal, the incredible poets in this collection have been able to capture this moment so powerfully and poignantly. And I'm really delighted to welcome our speakers for today, K. Satchidanandan, a leading Indian poet, and Nishi Chawla, an academic and a writer. Thank you so much for being here, both of you. We're also going to hear from many other poets who are part of this collection today from around the world to get a flavor of the diversity in the writing in this collection. But we're going to begin now with a poetry reading by Dr. K. Satchidanandan and then move on to our conversation with our speakers for the day.
Hello. Let me thank, on behalf of both of us, JLF, Kritika, Mohini, and all the organizers behind the whole series, which is getting concluded with a discussion on Singing in the Dark, which we think is absolutely proper. I'll read one of my poems in the collection to begin with. And also, I would like to pay homage to my friend Manglesh Dabral, the great Hindi poet who passed away very recently of COVID. I'll read one of the 2 poems that he has in the anthology. I'll begin with mine, On This Earth. We landed on Earth from different stars. That is why we speak different languages. Each word carries the aura of the memories of the stars we left. In sleep, we travel to those glittering homes. There we speak to our forefathers like geckos that know every one of its walls. We wake up to discover it's stardust on our skins. Second part. From which star did you come? I ask, watching the blue dust on her shoulders at dawn. She stares jealous at the red dust on my chest. We are now characters in some science fiction. Even our heads do not look human. 3. As we die, we return to the stars we left. We will forget our sojourn on earth. We will float in space as weightless souls until we get another body and another language. 4. I want to be reborn on earth, this time as a tree. You will be a bird perched on its bough. I will recognize you by the blue dust on your wings, and you, me, with the red dust on my bark. This time, we won't quarrel. I'll exchange my fruits for your song. There won't be humans to see or hear it. Butterflies, only butterflies. And the poem by Manglesh Dabral, one of the greatest Hindi poets who passed away recently. Touch. Touch the things that are kept on the table in front of you. Clock, pen stand, an old letter, idol of Buddha, Bertolt Brecht, and Che Guevara's photos. Open the drawer and touch its old sadness. Touch a blank sheet of paper with the words fingers. Touch like a pebble the still water of a Van Gogh painting, startling life's hullabaloo in it. Touch your forehead and hold it for a long while without feeling shame. To touch it isn't necessary for someone to sit close. It is possible to touch even from very far, like a bird from a distance who keeps her eggs protected. Please do not touch, or touching is prohibited. Don't believe in such phrases. These are long running conspiracies. Religious gurus holding flags, wearing crowns and shawls, bomb throwers, war racers, indulging for keeping us apart. The more, the more dirt, the more waste they spit. Only by touch can they be cleaned. Touch you must, even though it turns things topsy-turvy. Don't touch the way gods, priests, bigots, devotees, disciples touch each other's feet and heads. Rather, touch the way the tall grass appears to caress the moon and stars. Go inward, feel the moist spot touch. See if it still remains there or not in these ruthless times. Thank you.
That was absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Satchidanandan, for the wonderful readings. And thank you also for paying tribute to the wonderful Manglesh Dabralji. I think that his gentle presence will be missed deeply by all of us. And here's hoping that his poetry continues to fill the world with hope and light like it does already. Thank you so much. I'm going to return to our conversation now and invite both of you to, answer questions around the collection. I really wanted to know how the idea for this anthology came about, and how did you go about the process of inviting poets to contribute to this? What were your big challenges? Can you talk to us a little bit about the process? Nishi, maybe you can come in here.
Thank you, Mohini. Thank you, JLF, for the honor and the opportunity to talk about our book. It's hard to identify the exact moment of enlightenment or nirvana for anything that seizes the mind. On a primal level, our inspiration sprang from our urge to make sense of what is happening in our lives as the crisis plunges us deeper into a new reality that is virus driven. Human beings have long turned to creative expression in terms of crisis. So, when I approached the noted Indian poet Dr. K. Satchidananand and suggested that we compile a collection of poems on the theme of the pandemic, he readily agreed, and we plunged into our labor of love with an uncanny determination and passion. So we also realized that it is important to make it a record of a somewhat traumatic, drawn out collective experience. The pandemic has altered the way we think about social interactions. We believe that an anthology or a collection on a single theme and similar subject matter should be able to fashion and uncover a collective inner monologue by way of individual responses. The lockdown has transformed our lives in quintessential ways, but it has also unlocked our inner world as we are confined to our homes, and the future seems very uncertain. So, we believe that we were able to establish what resonates within the context of our shared experiences of the lockdown. So our kind of dedication to the anthology has of course been rewarded with media interest, a growing audience, and positive reviews. And we do hope our book will be part of our global cultural memory and our global literary history. I hope that answers.
Thank you. No, it's an incredible feat that you've put together this entire collection during this time, which has been so difficult for all of us. And I also wanted to know, you talked about shared experiences, and I was wondering what you would say is the overwhelming sort of emotion that binds this anthology together. Did you notice any patterns or similarities in the submissions that you received? And just in terms of people's experiences all around the globe, what is it really that you feel binds this collection together? Dr. Satchidanandan, maybe you can come in here if you like.
Yeah, in fact, it was when I found myself responding to the trauma that had surrounded us that I began to think of putting together a few of the poems that must be that are probably being written by other poets around the world. Because the pandemic somehow, it is true, it brought about a kind of disconnection among us, but there was also a deep and profound psychological connection that that introduced in our lives. We were sitting in our closed rooms, and we were trying to connect with each other in various new ways, often through virtual platforms like this. And then I found that yes, quite a few other poets were also writing about the pandemic, or the around the pandemic, if maybe a better term. And I came across a poem which is perhaps anonymous. I have also seen it being attributed to a poet, Harun Rashid. These were the lines I read. We slept in one world and woke up in another. Suddenly, Disney lost its magic. Paris was no more romantic. New York could not hold on. The Great Wall of China proved too small. Mecca was deserted. Hugs and kisses turned into weapons. Parents and friends were unwelcome guests. Money, beauty, and power lost their value, as none of them could provide us the oxygen we badly needed. But the earth continues to live, breathe, and be beautiful. Only she imprisons human beings in cages. She is sending us a message. You are not inevitable. Earth, water, and sky can exist without you. When you return, remember, you are my guests, not my masters. Well, this, in a sense, set off a chain of responses, in my mind. And I began to look for similar poems elsewhere. I found quite a few printed poems. I found a lot of others on the social media. And I knew that, sitting in their separate rooms, in their isolation, poets were trying in some way to find a meaning, in these dark times, and trying also to find out what was happening to them and what was happening to their kith and kin and their friends and all and the whole world. So I was sure that these poets were probably responding in their own very different individual ways. They would be backed by their own understanding of poetry, and they would be bringing in different kinds of moods and aspirations, and pains and griefs into their poems. And so finally, when we had these 121 poets from across the globe, we found, I mean, to answer your question, that there was so much in common. And perhaps, I often used to say that poetry is the mother tongue of human beings. And poetry is perhaps the language, the common language that existed before the Tower of Babel was broken. Probably, that is the biblical myth, that we had a common tongue, and languages were created later when the Tower of Babel broke, and we began to speak in different languages so that we wouldn't understand one another and the tower would never be built. But the poets have always been, throughout centuries, building a tower, this tower of communication. And so I found that all the poets were trying to return to those pre-Babel times when they were, they spoke a common tongue. So there was so much in common, the trauma, the solitude, at the same time the hope, because they were not only looking into the darkness of their rooms, they were also looking out the window and finding that there were new birds around them, still chirping, still being cheerful. The trees were putting on new blossoms, and the sky was still blue as ever. And so there was this beautiful nature around, and there were you sitting alone in your room, isolated, or once in a while going out wearing a mask or gloves, and sanitizing your hands and washing your hands very often like a ritual. And so the poets were responding in very similar fashions. Of course, there are differences, because there are joyful poems, there are poems of grief, there are poems of loneliness, there are poems of the need for a new collective, there are poems that put forward hope, there are poems that look back into the past, because in solitude often memories flood, the rush in, and you are overwhelmed by memories. So there are differences, and that is quite natural to poets, but there was so much in common. The way they felt, the way they reacted, the way they tried to articulate their feelings, the way they found new styles and forms of expression to write their poems responding to the situation. So yes, there is a lot in common among these 124 poets and more than 300 poems in the collection.
Thank you so much. I think sorry, Nishi, you were coming in. Please go ahead.
If you want me to weigh in on, and to piggyback on what Dr. Satchidanandan has kind of elaborated on your topic, I could perhaps kind of, or would you like me to do you want me to talk about what binds, what are the thematic links within the anthology?
Yeah.
Yes, so I do think, yes, all of these poets have enacted a kind of alchemy, and the anthology becomes a kind of extended meditation on the very nature of our present reality. With COVID-19, of course, upending, our lives, the creativity and power of poetry to make connections has never been felt more urgent. And I think, at this juncture, I do want to talk about, what has, the fact that what is important about the anthology is that, all of these poets, from across the globe, so to say, have, have resonated and endorsed the idea of poetry being a record of a collective experience. And mind you, poetry is a discourse constructed around the principle, that is the epistemological principle of the unique, that provides the readers with specific insights into individualized personal human expression. So poetry always emphasizes subjectivity, individual insights. Poetry, in particular, also in promoting multilingualism and the understanding of human diversity. And it can provide moments of contact among individuals living in diverse communities. Like here, the poems are in varying tones. Some are conversational, some are very kind of profound, some are expansive, some are kind of, very precise, and the moments of great beauty in many of the poems. But that one binding link, so to say, is that while poetry typically epistemologically emphasizes the idea of the unique, and poetry can provide a counterweight to the desire to collectivize and generalize. The focus is always on what do I think. It does remind us of the value of the humanly individual life. Poetry can also at the same time promote unity as an ideal and function through the inability to differentiate between the group and the individual member. So, the poetry here is in many ways, the poetic metaphors also are giving voice to the individual as well as the collective human experience. And I think that is what is singularly and uniquely kind of important and significant about this anthology.
That's very powerful. Thank you so much. And I think, what you also said about the individual and the collective, our relationship with nature, all of these things are just such important messages for us to take away. And it would be a shame if we don't, take that away from this experience that we've all been through together. So thank you for that. And thank you also, Dr. Satchidanandan, for saying poetry is the mother tongue of human beings. I think that's a beautiful thought that I'm going to remember for a long time. We'll take a short break from this conversation and maybe listen in to a poetry reading by one of the poets in the collection. Her name is Diane Wilburn Parks. She's a poet, visual artist, and author based in Maryland. So let's do that, and then we'll come back to this conversation after that.
Hello, my name is Diane Wilburn Parks. I'm reading my poem Isolated Wings from the book. We are now snowed in spring, listening to indulgence from the chirps of birds, fluttering feet, and faces of sun-drenched homes rising, opening the gold of blue skies. The world props against windows and doors, wishing for wings and the songs of birds. For more than 40 days, we've been flying into windows with untrained wings, caged inside walls, inside oily fingerprints left on glass. I keep wiping the edges of you off, cleaning the traces of your wild baby's breath, now marred with Lysol. April cringes inside its bloom, afraid to lurk beyond its curled tongue, leaflet buds. Windows listen for wind-rushed poetic mewlings. The color of dance is a strong song, wept in a brush of uncut grass and the husk of sycamore trees. Sleeves of rice bleed grain by grain. We eat sparingly. We see a man dancing in the center of the earth with meat skins whistling sound like flutes. These isolated iridescent wings can't fly, even fish feathers into water. Life is still aflutter. Paddled fins wade in waters that still flow, and the mist of white clouds return blue. The world props against cheeks and chests. Windows lick the oily salt of our skin, while fingers flap in and out of dreams unmasked words wish to be free again. With outstretched wings, we lift our opens, point our perched bodies to the wind. We twist our cages and bend them back, while the cageless man still dances in the feathers of his skin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. That was really beautiful, and I loved all the imagery in the poetry there. Thank you so much for that wonderful reading. We'll continue with our conversation now with Dr. Satchidanandan and Nishi Chawla here. I wanted to know from both of you, we are living in unprecedented times today, as we've heard over and over again. There are these jokes going around about how I miss living in precedented times. But it has been a very bizarre year. And I want to know from both of you, how has poetry helped you come out of this period? The literary community has really managed to stay connected, stay strong through so many virtual platforms like this one, like JLF Brave New World and other platforms. So has this been a source of strength for you? What is it that really kept both of you going in this lockdown?
Shall I? In fact, this is probably the sixth literary festival I am taking part. During these days. In the last maybe 4 or 5 months. Of course, JLF is one of the finest festivals across the in the world, and I've been there quite a few times. But I was also taking part in many international festivals, like the poetry festival in Medellin, another in Vilenica in Slovenia, and quite a few others within the country. So we found through all that poetry still acts as a major connecting link among human beings, even in these times of darkness and of isolation. And I was myself writing poetry, responding in different ways. I have only 3 poems in this collection, but I have a few more which I wrote during this time. Some were about the migrants who I could see in Delhi suffering so much and not even being able to catch a train to their hometowns and finding themselves helpless even after reaching in their hometowns because they had absolutely no employment. So I could see the suffering. I could also at the same time see, as I said, the nature flowering once again during this pandemic, because there was no intervention from the human beings, and it seemed that nature welcomed this kind of a situation while we found it absolutely unwelcome. Well, I spent my time also by taking part in several virtual programs. I was giving various kinds of talks, some usual kinds of academic talks, and besides many talks on the aesthetic and the ethical and the political aspects of the pandemic. I also spent time translating a few poets who I had always wanted to translate. I keep translating. I have more than 2,000 pages of translated poetry in Malayalam. But I wanted to translate some Bhakti and Sufi poets. I had always wanted to translate Kabir. So here I had all the time with me because I was not traveling. I was not being invited to go elsewhere and to spend many hours in the airports. So I translated Kabir's poems, enough for a book. Now it is coming out in a week's time. A book of 120 pages. Which carries different samples from Kabir's work, the Doha, the Bijak, the Ulat Basi, various kinds of poems that Kabir wrote, which I translated directly from Braj. And then I found myself translating the Vachana poets in Kannada, like Basawa and Akka Mahadevi. And then that's also over, and that book is ready for press. And now I am translating Bulle Shah, the major Punjabi Sufi poet, and I want to do Tukaram next, and maybe a few more Bhakti and Sufi poets, because that first, it gives me a kind of solace and a peace and a sense of peace, because these were poets of peace, poets of harmony, poets whose spirituality was not confined to any particular orthodoxy, but which was a kind of spirituality that was that was universal. that anybody could take in and anybody could be inspired by, like the spirituality of a Buddha or a Jesus Christ or any of the prophets, because they themselves didn't belong to religions. We often forget that, even though later religions began to follow them. So they only spoke about what they saw and what they heard and how human beings must live. And it is that kind of spirituality that I find in Bhakti poetry, which I have been studying for more than 20 years now. And so this for me was an opportunity to find solace in translating many of these poets about whom I have written and whom I have been reading all through my career, both as an academic and as an executive of the Sahitya Academy. These were many ways in which I spend my time. And recently I have begun to write short stories once in a while. Some people say they also are poems. Well, when poets write stories, it is likely that they become a little magical and surreal. And all these stories have a surreal element about them. So writing has been, on the whole, I just say, writing has been a major, major solace to me during these extremely unhappy, extremely traumatic times. Writing, translating, connecting with others to various kinds of virtual platforms, talking to others, sometimes seeing them, sometimes talking to a crowd that I do not see at all in front of me, that I can still imagine having been among people for so many years. So yes, I have stayed connected through poetry, through literature, and that is what actually literature does to me. Literature does to all of us.
That's an incredible use of your time. I can't wait to read the translations and short stories that you've come out with in this time. Thank you so much, Dr. Sachi. Nishi, would you like to talk about your experience as well?
Uh, well, Mohini, it has been a very intense period for me. And, it's somehow, of course, art as therapy is a well-recognized construct and truth. There are regions of sorrow and there are regions of great peace that are clubbed all in there. So, I tried to kind of make a well, we were Zoom reading a play that I'd written on intercultural love set in the 1970s and its ramifications, its implications in our current times. So, I kind of, had to turn it into a movie, which seems like, it goes back to the idea that I have always held about myself. I've taught full-time for 40 years, and I still think of myself as an accidental academician because I always wanted to become a writer. And, at 21, I did well at Delhi University, got a job at LSR, then a tenured position at Gargi College, did my PhD at George Washington University. But at the back of my mind, I've always thought of myself as I've taught here as well for the past 25 years that we've lived in the US. So University of Maryland and now at Thomas Edison University. But at the back of my mind, I've always thought of myself as an accidental academician. And now, strangely, I think of myself as an accidental filmmaker because the pandemic has strangely transformed me into what I never really thought of myself and would never reckon myself to be. I wrote the play and also directed it. And once the actors were all ready, and of course, theaters are not going to open for, God knows when. So we just decided to kind of turn it into a movie. Now, it's still a very slow moving, a very poetic meditation on love and on race issues. So, well, I've become an accidental, so to say, filmmaker. I'm still a writer at heart, a poet at heart, a playwright at heart. But the pandemic has conjured in different ways to bring out a different aspect of my personality. I have also been very involved and intensely kind of, engaged with this anthology. It did take us a long time, of course, to put it all together. Dr. Satchidanandan, I'm thankful and very grateful to him. Our journey has been very positive, and kind of bringing it all together has also been a very kind of intense and also a wonderful experience. So that's how I've tried to unlock various, untapped and unlock different aspects of my personality, if that answers your question.
It absolutely does, and how exciting to discover this new life. And maybe it'll be a new exciting life that you'll go into as well.
The film is also still a poem, so.
Of course, that's wonderful. Again, before we move on to the next part of our conversation, I'm going to, call for a short break here, and we will listen to one of the most renowned Indian English poets, Keki Daruwala, who's also contributed to this collection. So let's do that, and then we'll come back to our conversation.
It's been a bad year for all of us with this virus, and I was asked to write a poem, and I went to the Black Death, and I'm going to read a few poems from the Black Death. The first is a prologue. It's a spoof on the Black Death, the first one, because I didn't want to make it too dismal completely. Here it is, prologue to the sonnets. The devil, and it's the devil speaking. The devil never left Black Death in the foyer, to be discussed at length in devastating detail. Cleverer than Satan and Iblis, those soul sawyers, he couldn't ever fail. He checked out of Hilton. Memory had him dismayed. Didn't the hotel echo some rhymester of yore? Yes, of course, the guy who needed hearing aids, his verse sonorous as a river gorge. Having planted Brexit, the devil thought of exits, making a run for it, though sad to leave Hilton. In poor English, he said, this place is truly gala. His task severe, bury memories of Black Death in some catafalque, beyond the reach of sonneteering bums like Daruwala. I'm reading the first sonnet from the Black Death, and it's pretty dismal. Okay. The summons were from the Byzantium court. He was wanted there. The king's son was dead. The advance guard of buglers had got to him. How did he take it, he asked. The king's eyes bled. The messenger answered. Isaac, coiner and scribe, tried to address the king in that ornate hall, but hysteria ruled. Courtiers screamed. The Tartars, stricken with disease, threw plague across the wall. They catapulted corpses into the city. The royal ribs withstood a shudder. Think of Kaffa, that Genoese port, not terror, but think of pity. Leave witches alone and their ghastly spells, and keep the Jews away. They've suffered enough, and no, they haven't put poison in our wells.
Thank you so much, Keki. That was wonderful. And I hope all of you who are listening will get the collection and read the entire poem, because it's extremely relevant and very powerful. So thank you for that beautiful reading, Keki. I'm going to come back to our conversation with Dr. K. Satchidanandan and Nishi Chawla here, the editors of this anthology. I want to ask you a larger question around the role of poetry in the sort of dark times that we're living through right now, and role of poetry and also role of art at large. Art and poetry is sometimes considered an indulgence by many people, and but it's so important to have these voices come together, like we've been talking about, and talk about, capture the moment that we're living through. So do you feel that this collection sort of gives voice to that despair that we're going through, or do you see it as a voice of hope? How do you see this collection, in a time like this?
Art is not dispensable. Poetry is not dispensable. It is a necessity. And this is what, as a writer, I have always felt And even while compiling this anthology along with Nishi, both of us felt how necessary poetry is, how essential it is to our very lives, and how it brings people of different religions, different communities, different classes, different races together, giving them a human form and a human voice. And this essential function of poetry is made much more visible in times like this. In normal times, okay, we sometimes go for poetry readings or take part in literary festivals, but in these extremely exceptional times, we find how important poetry is. Poetry more than any other art. Of course, all arts are. I love all kinds of art. I spend a lot of time listening to music. I go to virtual art exhibitions. But more than anything, maybe because I am primarily a poet, I believe that poetry particularly has this ability to connect. Because it speaks directly to our hearts, it speaks directly to our feelings, it articulates our moods, and we find our own selves mirrored in somebody else when we read a poem, which we don't often do when we read even a novel, because we find a lot of people, we connect with all of them, they are all characters around us. But in poetry, somehow, especially if it is a kind of lyrical poetry, you find yourself in that poem and not other people. So there is a self discovery, and each one is discovering oneself, and through because each one is discovering oneself, they also realize how common ultimately their roots are and their selves are, what is common to their feelings, their affections, their worldviews, their way of looking at nature, looking at human life, looking at freedom, looking at movement and immobility, looking at space and looking at time. So in that sense, I think ultimately poetry has helped connect people during the pandemic. And we believe strongly that the poems in this anthology, which I need to show everyone now, uh, 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 I think they do perform that function. And I'm sure that reading this collection, reading the poems in the collection, will mean a lot to the people who are suffering from solitude and possible depression even in these very painful times.
That's a very important thought to remember. Thank you so much. Nishi, would you like to come in here as well?
Sure, thank you. Yes, the use of poetry as an intervention technique does play a significant role in reducing signs of depression, anxiety, and reported stress. Uh, we all know that the viability of poetry is a possible therapeutic method in alleviating depressive and anxiety-related disorders in various cultures. So, of course, it's imperative, especially in these times, to look at the arts as therapy. Arts are essential to healing a wounded psyche, as we've all heard about the science behind therapeutic writing. So there are, I do believe that this powerful and moving anthology or collection of poems stretches across the boundaries of skin color, ethnicity, religion to give voice to the experience of living in these unprecedented times, and therefore finding both a kind of an outlet for our despair as well as hope, to respond to the question that you had also asked us: is there more hope or is there more despair? So many of these poems address common themes of alienation, lack of communication, loneliness, and self-perception with extraordinary honesty, dignity, and insight. In recording everyday life in our diverse human cultures, in these difficult times, the anthology does serve to promote unity as an ideal and function uh, through the inability to differentiate between the group and the individual members of the collective. So multicultural poetry of the kind that you see here can be of value to poetry therapists who use poetry to stimulate therapeutic discussions because it is generally accessible, emphasizes narrative, and often tells stories which have not previously been available in poetry. So in other words, I just feel this anthology is a kind of chorus of cultures. an anthology of poetry that includes several poets of diverse ethnic and racial groups, which have traditionally often been underrepresented in the poetic canon, are included here. So I feel it can stimulate therapeutic discussion because it's accessible, it emphasizes narrative, and it does tell stories which have previously not been available in poetry. So, I think, as the world is, and especially the West is gravitating more and more towards a multicultural world, and we strive to fathom a range of cultural experiences, the use of poetry from various cultural groups does serve as a tool to bring us together as human beings. So poetry is a very real means of having us see ourselves and others as as being both unique and yet the same. So through the poetry that is recorded in our anthology, we can see ourselves and others in a new way. And yes, there is despair and loneliness and isolation that is voiced and kind of resonates through the entire collection. But of course, we need to look at hope beyond, as Christmas, we are on the eve of Christmas now. And, I'm a Hindu, but, and I respect all religions, but I feel, the new year is, well, drawing us towards some kind of hope. Let's kind of pray for that.
I hope so as well, along with you. And thank you. I love the phrase chorus of cultures. That's a great way of describing this collection. And, I know that I absolutely agree, because it has brought so much joy and hope. Well, joy is a difficult word to use, but it has brought some kind of a strength and sort of the sense of community, and for readers like me as well. So I'm sure everybody who is listening would agree with that, and hopefully all of you will soon get the collection and read all of the poems in it. I want to invite one of the other poets in the collection, Amanda Bell, who's an award-winning Irish poet, to read out a poem, and then we'll come back to our conversation and before we all leave.
My name is Amanda Bell, and I'm delighted to have my poem Bumblebees included in the lovely anthology Singing in the Dark. Bumblebees. There was no need to fret about the bees, their fragile nest unlidded as I pulled weeds beneath the apple tree, their squirming larvae naked to my gaze and to the sun. They watched me from the border while I hastily replaced the roof before returning to rethread the fibres of their grassy home. In the cleared weeds, I see their entrance and their exit, how their flight paths sweep the garden in an arc, stitching up the canvas of this space as if they could remake the world which lies in shreds around us. The dome moves as I watch it, the stretching of an inchoate form. When morning comes, it glistens with white dew.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I love how all the poems have very, very different and unique textures to them. So it's been really great to hear from some diverse poets who've been part of the collection here. Nishi, I want to invite you to read your poem as well before we leave. We're not going to let you leave without that. So please do read for us before we call it a day.
Thank you. I'll read this poem titled Infinite Karmas, because the pandemic has broken the laws of karmas. At the beginning was the outbreak. Blobs of swarming virus caught red-handed, fastened themselves on human lungs. Above those karmic laws that got bled out, the stars rip, the effects of human intention strayed, swelled. How one lives, front-lined with gloves and masks, mock at causality, casually proliferate in invisible tweets with red mountain clouds, dismantle the short supply of legends that look us in the eye, comfort us for no reason. Does it clink a glass or two now that the ceramic wheel got broken? Does it dodge bullets, whittled by the dark scraping, bend its shapes inside the deep flesh in cruel thumps, knowing no clear patterns of reactionary consequences? Pacing oneself to match an invisible fugu like enemy that rings in waves of new energy, in unison with the crevices the virus revisits, wild affliction, dead to the pangs of love, of lust, reaping the aroused days of its own self, karmic karmascapic bounds. Where is the blind eye of fate here? Discriminate between willing it, nor etched, nor accrued, in discrete scoops, shields of our own actions, generating, flourishing between the responsible and not so. Thank you. Would you like me to read a poem by another poet as well?
Yes, sure, of course.
Okay, I'm going to read this poem by Najwan Darish. We were together and I enjoyed this poem a lot. I'm not going to distinguish and choose one poem over others. I just thought it's kind of, I just feel the essence of poetry is in many ways the attempt to bring about an altered state of consciousness where the reader can experience more than the words on the page. So the apparatus of poetry seems to be transformed here and in other poems as well, but I'm going to read The Last Mask. I found it yet, the writing that liberates, that I once grabbed hold of, floundering in those suburbs, the writing that resembles passion and youth, and the delights of the flesh in the way it surprises. I have not found it, and maybe I'll stop looking, for I'm busy with trifles. My knife is dull now, and I'm pretending. I have no time to sharpen it. Time put on its masks and called me from behind the newborn in the cradle, the infant on all fours, the child's first steps, the stumbling adolescent, the misgivings of the youth, and the grown man's despair. Time called to me from behind all the frail and aging promises, where time has no more masks to wear. But now I've got to crawl and walk and stumble forward and chase down my misgivings and precede all the promises as I stretch myself out in the coffin. The last mask is in my hands, and I must wear it now. This is a poem, a beautiful poem by Najwan Darwish, who is a Palestinian poet, pretty well-known Palestinian poet. So thank you.
I think that was a perfect note to end this conversation on. Thank you so much, Nishi and Dr. Satchidanandan, for being in conversation with me and being here today. It really was a delight to hear both of you, and it was just such an insightful conversation. So I've learned a lot, and I'm really glad that we could do this before the end of the year. And thank you so much, JLF Brave New World, for bringing us so much joy and knowledge and literature and words to us through a very difficult year. I just hope we all have a peaceful and safe year ahead. So best wishes to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Happy New Year to you. Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Satchidanandan. Thank you, Nishi, for that beautiful conversation. Thank you for bringing the anthology to all of us in these very difficult times. We'd also like to thank Diane, Mr. Daruwala, and Amanda for the beautiful poetry readings that we all witnessed. Thank you all for watching and being a great audience. We hope you enjoyed this conversation, and we'll log back on Monday, 28th December for our Voices of Faith session on JLF's Brave New World. Peaceful Heart, the Buddhist practice of patience. His Eminence Zigar Kongtrul Rinpoche in conversation with Punita Roy at 7:30 p.m. IST. Jaipur Literature Festival 2021 will embrace a new digital paradigm as we will bring to you a specially curated online festival experience. Join us on the 19th to the 21st and 26th to the 28th February 2021. Wishing you all a very, very happy, healthy, and safe New Year. Thank you. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.